We acknowledge the lands of the traditional custodians across Australia. We recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples' continuing connection to land, water and sky country. We acknowledge the wine regions and hundreds of different nations around this continent, and the ancient soils on which we stand and grow. From the Wadani saltwater peoples of the Margaret River in our west, to the East Coast Sunrise people of the Yuin Nation, and the Southern Island and Saltbush peoples of the Nione peoples of Tasmania. Today and always, we pay our deep respects to the custodians, those who went before and those who will follow, as the knowledge holders of tomorrow. This is Australia.
Hello and welcome everyone to this very exciting Hunter Valley tasting. So we just a little bit of housekeeping to get started with. So welcome wherever you're tuning in the world, whether it's morning, evening or afternoon. So you've got a couple of tabs here on the right hand side of your screen. So you've got the handouts at the end. And if you click on there, you can see a really great PDF with information on all the winemakers that we're meeting today, the wines and the regions. You can also go on to the Q&A section, this is the most important section. So please ask as many questions as possible today. We've got 3 amazing legends joining us, and it's a really good opportunity to chat with them and get your questions across. So if you pop your question in the Q&A box there, and I'll try and ask as many questions as I can to them. Any that we can't get back to you today, we will follow up with, or we'll do our best to follow up with. So that's great. So we are focusing on the Hunter Valley today. So where are we? We are in New South Wales, the birthplace of Australian wine. We're around about 100 kilometres north of Sydney, which is just over a 2-hour drive, I know, because we drove it last month. It was a fantastic drive, very dramatic scenery. And I was lucky enough to visit all 3 of these estates and see them firsthand. So I'm back in London now, but we'll be joining the guys and they'll be tuning in shortly from Australia, which is very, very exciting. So why are we focusing on the Hunter Valley? Well, it's such a unique and exceptional place to make wine. One of the things that stood out for me when I was over there and tasting back through the back vintages were the personality of all the vintages. The weather and the vintage is so varied over there, and it's a real test for any winemaker in the Hunter Valley. And in my opinion, the best Semillon single varieties in the world come from this location, and some incredible Shirazes as well. So we're gonna talk through a few of the wines now, and like I said, click on the handouts at the end, and you can see the PDF and what we're tasting through. And yeah, we're gonna talk through these excellent wines and meet the winemakers and ask questions. So yeah, after that, I'd like to hand over to Stuart, who's going to give a short introduction into Australia.
Well, thank you, Bert, and good morning, everyone, from downtown Pacolban. It's wonderful to have you all here, and great to be here. I'd like to firstly begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, the Wonnarua people, and I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I'm really looking forward to the tasting.
Great, fantastic. Okay, so we've also got Andrew joining us as well, who is in Sydney this evening, I believe, who will be joining us shortly as well. There he is. Hello, Andrew.
Hello. Good morning, everyone.
Great stuff. So yeah, we're going to taste a few wines. We're going to talk about the different wineries. So we're going to start with yourself, Andrew. And obviously, when I visited you, so you're in a different part of the Hunter, obviously. And the thing that I was fascinated about, because we took a drive out in your Jeep out into the vineyards, and we went to that advantage point, we could see a lot of your vineyards down, and we walked through them as well. The most amazing thing with you is the incredible geology that you're working with, the soils. You've got, not only some of the oldest vines in the world here in Hunter and in Australia, but also some of the oldest soil compositions as well, and some really interesting soil compositions. Andrew Margan from Margan Wines, we're going to kick off with the first wine. So this is your 2021 Semillon, which you can just see here, guys. There we go. Let's get it right in the camera. Everything's reversed. There we go. So could you talk us through this wine? And also, I'm really fascinated because obviously sustainability is a massive part of what you do as well. And I found that fascinating in the vineyards, and also the importance of Fordwich Hill as well.
Yeah, well, okay. There's a lot of questions in one. I'll get my head around them. Yeah, I mean, Fordwich is a small sub-region just to the west of Colburn, sitting on the western side of the Brokenwood range, and it has the same basic weather as the rest of the Lower Hunter, with the Pacific Ocean being such a massive influence on us, and only being 80 k's away, and we have that warmth of during our ripening with cold nights, and I think that combination and the humidity that comes off the ocean, they're the biggest factors in the climate that affects our style. And one of the main reasons Hunter Semillon is like it is because of those variables. And within that, Fordwich has this unique patch of volcanic soil, and it's very formative in terms of my wines, and the effect it has in terms of the style of wine that comes off it is quite reasonable. And given that the Hunter has got such a strong sense of style in itself, the soil of the Fordwich still 200 million years old, and you've got to get your head around what 200 million years is. It's our continent's incredibly old, and so many people rave about the Semillon soils of Chablis, and they're 50 million years old. That's 150 million years difference. It's a massive difference, and our soils, our continent being so old, it certainly creates wines that have this unique quality. I think there's no doubt about that. The Hunter Valley has a bunch of really interesting soils, and the Fordwich sill as a soil in itself is particularly interesting, formed by a magma flow that came up through the crack in the earth and spread itself out over a defined area and broken down over 200 million years into this deep red volcanic clay loam. And so that, in terms of what it does to Semillon, and in particular, this is Fordwich Hill. So that's a specific vineyard block out of 65 acres of 48-year-old Semillon vines that were planted by Lindemans back in the early 70s. This particular block actually has an easterly aspect to it, and what we're finding, particularly with climate change, is where we are in Australia, is that is the amount of heat that we're getting during our ripening, and this last year is definitely not the same. But back in the drought years, and even in 21, where our westerly sun can get a little bit strong in terms of ripening, and our easterly slopes and our southerly slopes that are not getting that westerly sun, ripening a little bit slower and keeping our acid a bit better. And that's really what defines Hunter Valley Semillon, is the ability to get fruit ripeness at lower sugar, hence lower alcohol, and higher acid and lower pH. And that structure is what really makes Hunter Valley Semillon what it is, getting that fruit ripeness. And we get that with our warmth of ripening, and we keep our acid with our cool nights. So that's what comes together. On the red soil, so east-facing slope, this particular block, it keeps its acid even longer. So I can leave it just that the grapes out a little bit longer, and still keep the acidity. So I get a little bit more up into above the almost citrus spectrum, almost get into pear, which is an interesting part of the fruit flavour spectrum in Semillon, to get to that level of ripeness. and still be only 11.3, 11.4% sugar and alcohol. And then the and still keep your acidity is what my soil does. And what makes it a little bit different is having that little bit of extra ripeness relative to the traditional, Brokenwoods and Tyrrell styles means I get a little bit more richness in middle palate, so the wine becomes a little bit softer as a young wine, and that's not a better or worse scenario. It's just a difference. I was lucky enough to make that one at Tyrrell's for a number of years, and the strength of acid and the line and length that those wines have is unbelievable. And but my soil doesn't give me that, so I work with a slightly different style and slightly different structure. They age a little bit differently. I guess having a little bit of softness there to start with means that they tend to be a little bit softer all the way through, and you can say they age a little bit quicker, but maybe the difference is 25 years versus 30 years. So I don't know how long you want to age your Semillons for, but that's certainly a feature of the wines, that they soften a little bit earlier, for sure, if you want that feature.
We just had a first question as well from Hannah. You sort of answered it there as well, but the question is, what kind of flavors does Semillon get from volcanic soil? So how does it differ in flavor profile from volcanic soil?
Well, you're working in the same flavor spectrum, and so that goes from unripe characters, which can be green apple or grassy characters, which we are generally trying to avoid, and then you get into citrus, so lime and then lemon, and lemon butter or sunlight soap, as you get more sort of lemon ripeness, if you like. And generally, and I'm speaking on in behalf of Stu and Bruce, but generally that's where Hunter Valley Semillon will stop. But and that's my country as well, where it's my volcanic country, or the sandy flats of Brokenwood, or the even the red clays of Brokenwood. They generally sit in that spectrum. I find that I can get a little bit past that and go into pear, and I don't really remember ever seeing pear in the Semillons that I made at Tyrrell's, for example.
Great.
And you don't need to have pear in Semillon. That's not what we're aspiring to here, but it is part of. I see it as part of the spectrum I get to with ripeness. But some of my even more ripe. So my entry level Semillon is it gets to 12.5, 12.8. And that can be quite pear-like.
Awesome, thank you so much. Next, I think we'll chat about sustainability on the next wine, if that's okay. So we'll move on to the next wine now, and we're going to hand over now to the legend that is Bruce Tyrrell. Obviously, Tyrrell's world famous. That one being one of the most awarded Australian wines of all time, one of the most famous wines of all time, full stop. Founded in 1858. The amount of history that these guys have, it's been passed down through the generations, and also in the vineyards is impressive, not just for the so-called New World, but for any winery anywhere in the world. It's seriously impressive. So hope that's okay for an introduction, Bruce. And we're gonna taste your wine now. So we're tasting the 2015 HVD Vineyard. And if we could start by talking about the vineyard itself, because we had lunch together, didn't we? And we chatted about this vineyard and how special it is. Could you tell us a little bit about the HVD Vineyard, please?
Probably before we talk HVD, it's really a little bit of where we've come from in Semillon in the last 40-odd years. A little earlier than that, the late 60s, I remember being with my father in the winery, and a chap called Graham Gregory, who was great show judge, head of horticulture for the Department of Ag here. And in those days, Semillons were made at, a lot of them, 9.5 alcohol and high in acid. I remember Dad showed this wine to Gregory, and he said, "Jesus, Murray, there's enough bloody acid in that to take the enamel off your teeth." And he was right. It wasn't very easy to drink. And I never forgot that conversation. And in the early 80s, Andrew Spinazzi, my chief winemaker, and I spent a lot of time talking about where we wanted Semillon to be. We knew that we had something that was totally unique in the world of wine, that this Hunter Semillon wasn't being made, and we didn't think could be made anywhere else on the planet. The only place I've ever seen it close is at Concannon, down in the Livermore Valley in California. And the owners sold out and they took it back up to 13.5 alcohol and wrecked it. It tasted like a ordinary Chardonnay. So we worked through that and knew that we had to get them a little bit riper, and we're talking 3 or 4 or 5 days, that's all. And in that process, we learnt that the actual sugar reading, the acid reading was important, pH was very important, but at the end of the day, it was the flavour. We don't drink the technical stuff, we actually drink the flavour. So it was to have good flavour, still be around the 11.5 alcohol, so they were lively and fresh and really vibrant acid. And also at the top end to then give them bottle age. There was very little Semillon around anywhere that actually had the age on it. And that's what it does, that's what sets it apart from any other white wine on the planet, that you've got these lower alcohols, you've got wonderful balanced acid, you don't have any sharpness or bitterness in the acid. The acid's there, but it's just there to keep it clean and fresh. And so we've spent a long time working our way through that, getting it to where it is today. Bottle age, very important. Probably the most important thing in the life of that one particularly was throwing the corking machine away and bottling them all under screw cap. Under cork, we had different wines. They tasted different. You had them from brilliant to corked and dirty and generally bloody awful. So the under screw cap, we got consistency. Anyone opened a bottle anywhere in the world, they could go, wow, that's great. And we weren't having to apologise for that. So yeah, this is this really special thing. HVD, we have VAT1, which comes off our own property across the road from the winery, and is very specific in that vineyard where it comes from. But then over the years, I've spent a lot of time around the district finding what I believe were the best vineyards and getting my hands on them, leasing them, buying them, renting them, holding the grower out to ransom, whatever I had to do to get control of these great vineyards. And the one thing it teaches us is that while Hunter Semillon has a style, each of these vineyards adds their own little bit of character. And you can line them up, and yep, they're all Hunter Semillons, but they're all different. They've all got something that runs with them. And that's really, to me, what's the special bit. We do all of those now at about 5 years old on the market. But when we get something great, and that's probably because I'm a bit of a hoarder, we'll put 500 or 600 dozen in the shed and we'll leave it there till it's 10 or 12 years old and then release it. Because we can, and because it's part of making sure the world knows what this wine can do, that Hunter Semillon can become one of the greatest wines in the world and most unique wines in the world. And I think that's what we're all looking for, looking at things that are truly unique but that are great, great quality. So, I think my bloodstream's probably about 80% Semillon. I remember someone saying to me once, we'll never let you give a blood transfusion because the person who gets it will wake up with a hangover, and that'll be caused by Semillon. So, yeah, that's HVD. Sorry, a little bit about HVD. It stands for Hunter Valley Distillery. This vineyard was planted in 1908 by the Hunter Valley Distillery Company, predominantly to make spirit. because most of our sales were fortified wines. They went broke in the Depression. Penfolds leased it until 1948, and they bought it. And it was run through the whole time then by Brian McWigan's dad, Perce. And then we bought it from them right at the end of 1982. Sold by, just really put a price in and see how you went. And I think Penfolds did it that way because they didn't want the McWigans to buy it, because they'd looked after it. So we got it. Wonderful asset. Also on that vineyard is about 2 odd acres of Chardonnay that was planted in 1908 on its own roots. And it is quite possibly the oldest producing block of Chardonnay in the world on its own roots. So, real Chardonnay. It's lighter, sandy loam soil. It's the colour of milk coffee, it reminds me. It's a good cropper because it's got a creek on either side. So this will crop 4 tonne to the acre with no irrigation. Mostly we hand pick it, but the last 2 or 3 years it's had to be picked by machine because COVID took our pickers away, so we didn't have much bloody choice, unfortunately.
Right.
But a wonderful old vineyard. We've just re-trellised a lot of it, and it's really come again. So we've hopefully got it for a long, long time. So there we are. That's HPPC.
Yeah, it's a very special wine, and you really get those old vines in the glass as well, and the concentration of flavour is fantastic. It's a phenomenal wine. Next, we're going to hand over to you, Stu. So we're going just down the road, not too far away from each other, Brokenwood and Tyrrell's. We're going to hand over to Stu, who's from Brokenwood, and next wine we're going to look at the infamous ILR Reserve from 2015. Again, probably one of the signatures of Brokenwood, and again another world famous wine. So could you talk us through, Stu, the wine, and a little bit about be good to hear about sustainability. One of the questions in the box you've got here is about what are the challenges during humid seasons as well, and wet seasons.
Sure. Well, thank you, Bert, and great to see everyone again. So 2015 ILR Reserve. So this wine, I guess, a continuation of what Andrew and Bruce have said. I think in terms of stylistically, classic Hunter Valley Semillon. I guess this vineyard comes from a vineyard called Murphy's, which is on, I guess, traditional sandy alluvial soil, very fine, silty soil, quite fertile. Also crops heavily, up around that sort of 4 tonnes to the acre again, which I think is really important for Semillon for acid retention. Sort of low cropping Sem tends to, for me, lose its acidity a little bit earlier. So a little bit like a healthy crop's not a bad thing for these wines. That, I guess, what sets this one's released as a 6-year-old wine. ILR stands for our former chief winemaker and stalwart here at Brokenwood, Ian Leslie Riggs. So he was really the prior to Riggsy's arrival here at Brokenwood back in '82. Brokenwood really only made red wine. He was instrumental in white winemaking here at Brokenwood, and this is sort of an homage to him. I'm not sure if he named it after himself or not. It could be the case, but nonetheless, it's the first release of our ILR Reserve was in 1992, and it's simply the best Semillon we make in any given vintage. It's not released every year, but this 2015, I guess, displays all the characteristics of a sort of a medium-aged Hunter Sem. That toast is starting to show through. The brioche, lemon curd, all of those wonderful classic characteristics are starting to jump out of the glass. And I think it really defines the style. I think for me, like 15, certainly a challenging year here in the Valley, particularly for the reds, but whites, I think, really speak clearly of why this variety does so well here in the Hunter Valley. it doesn't mind the cooler, damp years or even the wetter, warm years that we tend to get here. So it's really adapted incredibly well to the region. And I think that's one of the things that we undersell about this variety, is that how well it does in this region. The ability to get phenologically ripe at low alcohol with natural acidity and build with time. I think there's really very few other varieties that do that. I think when you travel around the world, there's a lot of young, crisp, dry whites that are wonderful on a blue sky holiday in youth, but they really fall apart pretty quickly with time. And what sets our wines apart is that ability to evolve. And one thing Marg's mentioned that I sort of really think's important is that they shouldn't be time capsule wines. They should evolve and they should be drinkable within sort of our lifespan. Like, we're not building time capsules here. These wines really should build and evolve and have some drinkability in youth, but also in that sort of midterm time period, because it's time capsule wines that don't have the flavour, don't have the fruit weight. They really do not evolve very well. So picking those vineyards that have a bit of fruit weight, have some volume in youth, they're the ones that really have the ability to hang around with time. And that flavour development with age is what sets it apart. So I guess in terms of the wetter years, how we manage that, it's all we're really looking for is some really careful fruit selection, a lot of work in the vineyard, and those more, I guess for want of a better term, those more free draining soils tend to handle those wetter seasons better than others. When we look at our best Semillon vineyards here in the valley, they tend to be more on the floor, and the reds tend to be up on the ridges. And that's sort of that free draining sort of alluvial soil is really critical to surviving those wetter years.
Great, awesome.
If I could just butt in, the other thing I thought about too, Stu, is that when you think about the last couple of vintages where we've had a lot of moisture in the soil, and we've had issues of vines wanting to continue to grow and therefore having new shoots and having to try and keep copper up to the new growth, because obviously we use copper to prevent downy mildew, which has been one of the big issues. Is that I don't ever have to trim my Semillon vineyards. There's not new growth on them. They, on their own roots, they tend to be at the best moderate vigor, generally quite low vigor, relatively speaking, and therefore once they get to veraison, they stop growing pretty easily, and then your disease issues are out the window. Whereas you've got other things like Shiraz, want to just keep going all the time, and you've got to just keep your sprays up to them. Semillon, I think if you look at the world of wine, some varieties just seem to work very well with the climate of any particular place, and Semillon definitely does in the Hunter Valley.
Fantastic.
They get a bit of age, the vines change, they adapt themselves to the local climate, the local conditions that they've got to work with, and they change. And this variety certainly has done it here. Its adaptation has been that you get the flavour early, so you can get it off before it rains. There are a lot of places that try to do what we do, and they can't, because they don't have the conditions that allow that to happen. It's not something that comes from science, it's something that comes from nature.
That's a really good point. Like that thing we really look for with young Sem is if we're in that citrus flavour profile, we have the ability to age and evolve. I think when you take Semillon to other regions, what sets us apart is that ability to be in the citrus flavour profile in youth, and that's really what builds with time. Semillon in other regions can really, it can have very high acidity in a cooler site, but it also can be quite herbaceous when it's not actually phenologically ripe, which tends to make wines that don't age nearly as well as these. Like you look at these sort of the young Margan wine, but like the 16 and 15, that evolution of flavour with persistence of acidity, it's a unique thing.
I think also, Stu, you've got the other thing with these wines is they really are wines of about 3 lives.
Mm-hmm.
You've got them when they're young and fresh and vibrant, we don't put lemon in oysters here. We tip a bit of young Semillon in the oyster and have it that way. It's much better.
Yeah.
Then they get to about 5 years, and they go into this. They start to change. You start to get some age characters, bottle age characters. The acid's starting to back off a little bit, so they're getting softer. And then you get to about 10 to 12 years old. And then they go to becoming old wines, I suppose, where you've got much more of the flavour development on the palate. They're softer. And they don't change much then.
No.
They stay pretty much the same for 30, 40 years. We don't really know because we haven't been using screw caps long enough to see how they'll properly age. But that's the great thing. I've seen these out of the old Lindemann being 50 and 60 years old that are just wonderful, but they've still got that bit of freshness. That's the great thing with it.
Yeah, the unique character of Semillon from the Hunter. It's fantastic. We've got a really good question. I'm not sure who it's aimed at. Maybe it's you, Bruce, from what you were saying before. But the question is, why do so few Hunter Semillons get to the UK? Is it because you drink them all?
Too bloody good to send over there.
No, give me an agent, I'll send him some.
Yeah.
Get an importer.
No, we more than half of what we ship to the UK is Semillon.
Yes.
And we're found in places that, where there are great restaurants, there's a great restaurant community, that's where, these aged Hunter Semillons really work, and where there's an understanding of them, and there's a great love for them. For years, Wine Australia, under its various guises, had bought people here from various countries, a lot from the UK, over probably 40 years. And they've all taken home this love of bottle-aged Semillon and spread the word a bit for us. It's a little bit underground. It will never be mass market product.
Yeah.
Because there's not that much here. We're only, 1.5% of Australia's production. So it's only small.
It's very small.
Yeah.
So
and there are X number of great vineyard sites. So I'm afraid, it's we can do what we can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always think it's a great sign of a well put together wine list when I see a couple of expressions of Hunter Valley Semillon on there as well, from a food pairing aspect, like you said, with the oysters as well. But I've served Brokenwood Islay with raw Orkney scallops before, and it's one of the most phenomenal pairings I've ever tasted before. But yeah, and also the restaurant scene in Sydney is so vibrant, and when I was there as well, saw so many great restaurants with Hunter Valley wines on the list as well. So I know a lot of them get drank now as well. But yeah, it's good question. So we're going to move on to the next wine. So it's back to you, Andrew. So we are going to taste some Barbera. Get it the right way. There we go. So you're a bit of a trendsetter and a trailblazer when it comes to different grape varieties as well. I know you're one of the first to plant Albino, you've got a phenomenal amount of different international grapes which do incredibly well in the climate and the soils you've got. So this is the 2019 Barbera from yourself. So could you tell us a little bit about it, please?
Yeah, so I planted Barbera in 1998, so the first in the Hunter to do so. There's still not a lot of Barbera in Australia. I got some cuttings taken from a vineyard up in Mudgee that was planted by an Italian guy called Carlo Carino, and he brought over what we call suitcase clones in his luggage and planted them out. So that vineyard's since been pulled out. So from my understanding, it's the only vineyard left in Australia from those original Piedmont clone. And anyway, I planted in 98. It took a while to adapt, I've got to say, to the climate. It freaked out every time it got over 38 degrees, and that can happen sometimes in summer, and would drop its leaf. And then, as older vines do, it did adapt. And the wonderful thing about the variety is it doesn't depend on tannin. It depends on acidity for its back palate. And in these climate moving times where we're getting a lot more heat in our ripening, it keeps its acid. And in fact, in a cool year like we just had, 2022, it was a really cool ripening period, and it was sitting at 13.5 and still sitting at 12.5 grams of acid. And I had to wait. It was ripe in all ways, but it still had too much acid going on. So, and the soil was quite moist. So it does well in that environment. It's doing well in the Hunter Valley, I think. I'm still working with different ways of experimentations around a whole bunch and using concrete for storage, and it doesn't really need oak because it doesn't have much tannin there at all. So what are you putting in oak for? I don't really want oak tannin in to disrupt the way the palate finishes. It doesn't need to soften necessarily. So I might put the pressings into a bit of oak, but the rest of it I'm now using either concrete or stainless. I always pick it around its acidity rather than like we had a really ripe year in 2014. It was a great red year in the Hunter, and I picked the Barbera at 12.5 Beaumay because its acid was down to 9 grams, and that's about where I want to always pick it, because that's what gives the wine its structure and its difference. It does really well in the Hunter because whilst it has some beautiful varietal definition, it picks up that beautiful savouriness that we get in our red wines in the Hunter Valley, and that combination I think makes it look particularly Italian, if you like, given that it is New World wine. And as an expression, it's an expression of Barbera from the Hunter Valley, and that's what I love. I mean, it is planted on some beautiful red clay again, some volcanic dirt just behind my winery. I've got 9 acres of it. It now, it's crops always every year. I get about 14 to 16 tons every year off that 9 acres. And it's very consistent, as I say, wet, cool year. I've made some beautiful Barbera off 21, 22, which have been lesser years for me and for Shiraz, but Barbera's been wonderful. So, yeah.
It's a great wine. I think it'd be a shame to compare it to like Piedmont, because it's completely unique and different from anything from there, and it's got a wonderful expression, and it's tasting really well. 19 as well. Awesome.
I think the great thing about Piedmont is, climate change has been much more significant in the northern hemisphere, and those vineyards, those slopes that in Piedmont that were planted to Barbera because they weren't considered good enough slopes for Nebbiolo to make Barolo, are now coming into their own. They're getting a lot more sun. They're getting ripeness, and now all of a sudden you're seeing Barberas, $120, $150 a bottle here in Australia for a really good Barbera, and they're wonderful wines. And they're inspiring me. They're inspiring me to make better Barbera. That's for sure. Yeah,
absolutely. And could we just talk quickly about sustainability in the vineyard as well, what you're doing and what the steps you're taking?
Yeah, well, that's Ceres Hill, where the Barbera is grown, and that, as I've got 2 farms. One is where the Semillon came from, which is the one that was planted by Lindemans, and then home, which I planted myself around the winery, which I've got about 45 acres planted there now. And we're in conversion. I'm not going to say, I don't like saying we're in conversion to organic, because we're never going to go to the path of having organic on the label. That's not the point. It's more about having decent regenerative agriculture and looking after soils better, and stop the monoculture that we have had in the past, or we've had a vineyard with cooch in the middle, or clean fields. It's biodiversity. It's carbon sequestration in soils. It's just being a lot more mindful about how we're farming the land. And I've got my kids have come home and they say they're uncompromising. There is no way that they're going to farm traditionally. They want to use sustainable methods, and regenerative agriculture is the core of our future farming. And I've got to say, I've farmed for a long time, and I have been a traditional farmer, and I'm changed. And now I look at my vineyard, which years ago would have said that's a bloody mess, someone clean it up. Now I now look at it and go, my God, look at this biodiversity. Look at how many different plants there are. And they used to be called weeds, but that's when you didn't want them. Apparently we want them. So, yeah. I mean, that's what it's all about. Biodiversity is the key to having a healthy property, whether you're farming grapes or whatever. And we're all over it. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
I look back at a lot of things that we're told today are wrong. But my grandfather ran a vineyard for 60 years in his lifetime, a certain way. And he changed and he adapted, and that's what I've learned. You know, we buried old John Tulloch yesterday at 90, who grew grapes in the district for 60 odd years, 70 years. And obviously the things that they were doing worked because the vineyards are still here and they're still producing. And it's, just, there's no set of rules. There's what works on this vineyard doesn't work over there because that soil over there is different. And you've got to manage them differently to get the best out of it. And I suppose, does that work? Well, I've got a vineyard that's 160 something years old, so you can't just chuck that out. So it's being aware of what's happening and being aware of nature. I think that's a lesson I've learned in my life, that if you try and step away from nature, what it's showing was to, it'll bite you on the backside really hard and you'll pay dearly for it. But then, I look at what we do today compared to 30 years ago. And there are quite dramatic changes in the way we look after our vineyard. The great thing in the last 5 years has been sunscreen. Natural product, kale and clay, and it's just like putting sun cream on the 5-year-old when he goes to the beach. Been a wonderful innovation. Great. The western side of vines now, we let them sprawl. If we think it's going to be a hot, dry season, it's just like putting an umbrella over the vine. It's a thing of sustainability. Sustainability means that you get a crop again next year, and you get one the year after, and you get the one the year after. Because if we can't do that, then a whole lot of people starve. So at the end of the day, you have to get a result, or we don't have anything left. But to me, it's all about reading your country, reading the plants you've got, and working with that, and going on. That's what my grandparents taught me, and I think they were pretty right.
As I say to my kids,
sorry.
Yeah. As I say to my kids, there's no point being an organic grape grower if you haven't got any grapes.
Exactly.
So we're gonna carry on now. We're gonna carry on with you, Bruce, and talking about a hot vintage. This is 2018. It's your famous VAT 8 cuvee, and it just goes to show about the amazing diversity that we have in the Hunter. So this is a Shiraz and Cab blend. So please, could you talk us through this blend?
Yeah, look, we first made this wine by mistake in the 60s. 70, 80%, 90% Hunter Shiraz, and just a little bit of Cabernet. And in these sort of blends, the Cabernet's there to give you a little bit more tannin on the finish, but to give it a hit on the nose. Shiraz more back palate and finish. Cabernet's, up front. It's just the difference in the style. So I think we first made it a bit by accident. This wine, we went in the early 90s to Coonawarra to find Cabernet, and a fellow called Ralph Fowler, who'd been our winemaker in the 70s rather, had gone down there. And so I rang Ralph and said, "You got any decent Cabernet?" And in 1990, Riverland Cabernet in bulk was more expensive than Coonawarra Cabernet. Nobody wanted it. And I bought 25,000 gallons of it. And the last truck arrived, and I remember the guys, and Andrew Spinnersy was there then, came to me and said, "I think Ralph sent us the wrong wine." And this last truckload was his show. Cabernet was sensational wine. So I rang him and I said, "Mate, have you made a mistake?" And he, no, you got what you were supposed to get. So I shut up and copped it. And then remembered back to the old Hardy's and Millara days when they made blends of Coonawarra Cabernet and Hunter Shiraz. And they were some of the great reds of Australia, and no one was doing it. I thought, well, I'll resurrect that style, and that's what started it. We moved out of Coonawarra, We moved here, there and everywhere for 15 years, finding Cabernet without finding a home. And then one of our local growers came to me and said, look, someone had convinced her to plant Merlot, which was a terrible thing to do. And it was no good. She said, what'll I do? And I said, graft it over to Cabernet. You may not make the greatest wine in the world because the hunter's not known for it. But you'll make something that'll get you through the wet years. It'll give you wine for cellar door. And I said, do you want me to get the cuttings for you? And she said, no, I'll get them. So 2009, we picked the first of the grafted cuttings. Came in, it's only a hatful of tons, 3 or 4 tons. And suddenly everyone's walking around the winery going, where have you seen that Cabernet? It was sensational. Absolutely. So I rang Robin and said, where did you get it from? And she said, I got it from Lakes Folly, cuttings from Lake Folly, where nobody's supposed to get cuttings from Lakes Folly and nobody knows where they came from. So I rang Rod Kemp, the winemaker, and said, what did she do to you? How did you get to give her the cuttings? And he said, I just did it. And so this is only about 10%, all it makes of this wine. The Shiraz comes off a ridge west of the winery. So rather than the medium to lighter savoury Shiraz, it's a bit bigger, a bit stronger, gets a bit riper, a bit higher in alcohol. And we blend this bit of Cabernet back to it.
Freshness there in the glass as well, which I love. That you've managed to capture that freshness and acidity as well.
Yeah, fair bit of this, fair bit. 30-40% of this goes into small, newer oak. The rest of it goes into Fordwich, 2,800 litre, bigger barrels, but newer barrels. We basically put all our red through those days. So it's a bit of a, it's not traditional hunter Shiraz. It's bigger. It's got the bit of Cabernet. It is what it is. We quite like it. We keep making it. People keep buying it, so it can't be too bad.
No, good point. We've had a good question come in. Maybe you could answer this, Stu. So it's a question about, we've talked about challenging vintages for reds, but not whites. What are the differences and what are the challenges in the hunter?
Well, I guess the big difference is picking date. So Semillon and the whites tend to come off in mid to late January, whereas the reds really are sort of into Feb, really mid-Feb is when we're picking. So what we tend to get here in the hunter when we do have a wetter season is late summer rain. So that can really be the driver of quality for us. So realistically, we get our Semillon off every year. It comes off it's off in time, and it can be a little bit more of a challenge with the reds. So that really is the big driver of when we actually do see that rainfall. If all of our reds are off before the late summer rain comes off, well, we're on clover. And if it comes in a bit earlier, it can just make things a bit challenging. And really, that's in those cooler, wetter years. It really site plays the biggest role. Those sort of sites that crop a bit lighter, ripen a little bit earlier, really come into their own. Invariably, when we look at our old vine resource for our Shiraz, they are the blocks that tend to come off earlier, and they're therefore given the opportunity to become old vines. And I think it's probably the case for both whites and reds for me here in the Hunter Valley, and to be honest, anywhere. The best blocks for me come off early because they give you an excuse to pick. You're not looking for you're not looking for 5% more flavour. You're not looking for a little bit more tannin ripeness. You're not looking for a little bit more complexity. The best blocks are ripe and they're in balance and they're ready to go. Those lesser blocks that maybe crop a bit heavier, a bit later in the season, you're always looking for that little bit more, just a bit more weight, a little bit more flavour. And in those more challenging years, they can be the harder ones to actually get over the line.
Awesome. Thanks very much. So to finish, we've got the 2018 again. Shiraz, get this the right way, Brokenwood, Shiraz. So please could you talk us through this?
Sure. So, look, 2018 is a fantastic year in the Hunter Valley, undeniably, for both reds and whites. Warm, dry year, the second of 4 dry years, to be honest. Vines are in really good health. And one of the things that sets the 18s apart for me is we had quite a warm, or hot, dry summer, but tail end of January into early February, we had some cooler or warmer weather rather than just hot. So on the edge of vintage, things just slowed down a little bit and ripened. We had a very nice 2 to 3 week window of very even, gentle ripening. And I think in 18, Andrew mentioned the 2014 vintage. For me, 18 and 14 are the 2 best vintages that we've had in the last 15 years. And I think they just made exceptional red wines. So I guess for me, Hunter Valley Shiraz, medium weight, fine, long tannins with natural acidity and much more savoury fruit than that sort of sweet concentrated fruit. So it's a much more elegant, restrained style of Shiraz. I think at 4 years of age, this wine's really displaying everything that I want to see in sort of mid-term Hunter Valley Shiraz. Sort of that wonderful, savoury, brambly fruit, bit of iodine starting to come through, some really very fine, long tannins, and a wine that will age incredibly well due to that natural acidity. This is a blend of, this is the younger vine parcel off our Graveyard Vineyard. So the Graveyard Vineyard is a vineyard that was planted in, the old vines were planted in 1968. It's about 100 metres from the winery where we stand here tonight. 100% hand-picked, a mix of vine age from those 1968 vines through to younger vines planted in 2003. 100% matured in French oak puncheons, so 500 litre casks for about 12 to 15 months. And I think I love the 2018 wines. I'm obviously a bit biased. I love ours, but I love Marg's and Bruce's. The Hunter Valley Shiraz for me from 18 is something to get really excited about. I think they speak incredibly clearly of both the region and the year, and I can't ask for too much more from them than that. I think they'll live incredibly. They'll be very long lived, but there's an immediacy to them. That fruit purity is really an exciting thing to see.
Actually, Stewie, we talk about oak a bit, but it's never that obvious in a lot of our wines. I know we changed back in the 90s, where there was a fair bit of small new oak used,
Yep.
because that was the thing to do. That we moved to foederers, to 2,800 litre barrels, and what it's done is it's given a bit of lift and freshness to the wine. But what you taste is actually what you grew in the vineyard. It's not what some guy grew in a forest somewhere else in the world. There's a wonderful bit in the book on Maurice O'Shea that a cask is a place for the wine to lie and rest and get itself ready to bottle, and it must never add any flavour to the wine.
I think that's a really big thing with Hunter Shiraz that sets it apart. That sort of, there's a prettiness and an elegance to the wines that I tend to find new oak really can shut down quite heavily. Yeah. I think that's one thing that I've seen, not just here at Brokenwood, but in almost all the top producers here in the Hunter, is that step away from not just new oak, but also just barrel size. That there's a real incredible openness that one sees in the wines with larger format. And I think there's a bit of I think there has been a real change over the last sort of 15, 20 years of sort of Shiraz is far more delicate and elegant than we, I guess, traditionally think of this sort of big, bruisey, blockbuster red. It has much more in common in the Hunter Valley, I think, with Pinot Noir than it does with sort of Cabernet or even Barossa Valley Shiraz. It's a much more restrained style.
I think you've just answered someone's question without even knowing it there, so well done. So Mike Turner asked, have you always preferred more fruit than oaky? Was it a modern trend, or is it just these particular wines we're trying And I'd love to hear what Andrew says on this as well, because when we did the tour of your winery as well, I noticed you had concrete and all different types of vessels being used there as well.
Yeah, look, I mean, the inherent Hunter Valley tannin structure of Shiraz doesn't lend itself to having massive wood tannin chucked in with amongst it all. You know, it's such a unique silken style of tannin structure that it is what makes Hunter Valley Shiraz so different. And to take that away by adding new oak tannins is too much of a shame, I think. And yeah, we're all tending to go away from it. Whether it's older small oak or larger oak or and concrete. I haven't actually used concrete for Shiraz yet, but it's certainly on the cards to do. But yeah, other vessels that allow the softening of the wine and the growth of the wine, which is what we're looking for, without adding extra tannin as a flavour or as a drying component to the back palate, or changing the inherent structure is got to be a good thing for Hunter Shiraz.
Excellent. Yeah, couldn't agree more. And then we've got another question. It's open to anybody. So what would you say, we've kind of covered this as well previously, Stu, but what would you say are the distinguishing features of Hunter Shiraz compared to, I never heard of this place before, Barossa, I think it is. Yeah, I've never heard. Yeah.
You can drink
South America, isn't it?
I think that medium weight and that savoury fruit is really the two things that I keep going back to. The power of these wines is finesse of tannin and I guess fresh fruit, as opposed to just concentrated ripeness. Like we really don't have the opportunity to hang the grapes out there for an extended period of time. And I think 20 years ago we looked over the border and thought we looked on a little enviously of that. But I think it's one thing that we hold on to with great pride is that natural acidity that we're able to hold on to here. 13.5% alcohol. They're incredibly versatile wines, but I think that tannin acid length gives them great longevity with time.
And it's much easier and much more pleasant to drink.
And it's enjoyable.
Yeah, which is probably what it's all about.
One of the most frustrating things that has happened with Shiraz is that when the focus in the world was on Australian wine in particular, and the Robert Parker syndrome of red wine, focused really hard on the Barossa and those massively alcoholic, big tannin styles of red wine. The Hunter a bottle of Hunter Shiraz sitting next to it was like people didn't understand it. They're saying, well, this is what Australian Shiraz is, this big, bold style. This is what we love, and the Hunter, paled in comparison in that style. Now the world's moved on. Unfortunately, the focus has come off Australia, and we're still here 198 years later, still making Shiraz the same way that we've always made it. And people have moved into our style, and because people have forgotten about Australia, we're sort of been, again, missing out.
I think that is changing as well. I think the trend in the UK is definitely changing towards these more elegant styles and more expressive, pure styles as well. So I
don't think Margs was referring to the UK.
The other thing with them, again, it's a bit like the Semillon story. They're really great to drink. You don't wake up the next morning with a dry mouth and a pain in the belly. They don't kill the food that you're drinking them with.
Sure.
Wine's supposed to complement the food. It's 15.5 alcohol and full of brand new American oak that was designed for the bourbon industry. They're not very nice to drink. They're pretty tricky to taste. But at the end of the day, if you want to keep drinking them, it's a big, hard job, and you'll pay for it the next day.
As your old man used to say, Bruce, give your hair on your back if you drink that stuff. No one, it's never been medically proven. I'm not sure it's true.
I always thought if you had hair on your back, it'd burn it off.
Anyway, right, moving on. We're just coming to the end now, but I'd just like to ask you all, how are you guys dealing with climate change in the Hunter as well at the moment?
Look, it's one of those things. Climate's been changing since the dawn of time. I've just done a 50-year exercise for some paramedic rain insurance. When I look at, when are the years that we'd been written off, when they wouldn't. The worst year was the 70s as a bracket. So the climate change is a great word because it does continue to change. And if you're growing anything, you have to learn very early that nature's in charge and you have to adapt to it. And that we as human beings on this planet aren't that important, really. The weather continues to change, we'll be gone, and the tortoises will take over, or whatever it is. But you have to continue to change and adapt. I'm not going to pull out 150-year-old Semillon, 100-year-old Chardonnay vines because someone told me the climate, you won't be able to grow them here in 5 years, because I know that's not right. But what I will do is I'll continue to change my viticulture as required to make sure that those vines produce great quality fruit. I think that, again, the great thing about sustainability, and that's where we've been. That's the track we follow. We've been formally doing it since 2009. And we've reduced our carbon output, and I measure it per case of wine produced. So it's a real measure. Buying carbon credits is cheating. You're just paying someone else you're not reducing the level of pollution. So you've got to have you've got to be for real about it and work about it. Things like lightweight bottles. Was the first 12.5% reduction we got, because you got more on a pallet. The truck didn't weigh as much and it used less fuel, and on that goes. So yeah, we've all got it. We've all been doing it for a long time.
And I know that. Sorry, go on, Bruce.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I know at Brokenwood as well. They're using wastewater as well, and reusing wastewater and putting. Yeah, I found that fascinating as well. Jeff showed us that as well, so that's great. But yeah,
50 years ago, it was the only spare water we had.
Yeah. That's fascinating. Cool. Okay, cool. I think we've just got one last question, or just running slightly over, but we've got, it says, how early are you picking your Semillon grapes? So I guess obviously it depends on the vintage. So what time rough? And I guess it changes every year.
It depends on the vintage. I picked Semillon the latest. I've picked it in my time in the Hunter this year. So I think if you did the average over the last 15 years, I think the month of January covers it. But look, generally speaking, Australia Day is the tail end of January. We tend to start, give or take, around Australia Day. So the 26th of January is about where we kick off. On a warmer year, it might go back to as early as the 15th. A later year like this year, we really didn't start until after that. So it's pretty hard to draw a blanket over it. But if January certainly covers it at the moment.
Yeah, look, we plotted out 50 years of picking dates of two top Semillon vineyards, 2 top Chardonnay, 2 top Shiraz. The Semillon and the Shiraz haven't actually changed that much, but the Chardonnay's 2 weeks earlier.
Yep.
That's the trend. We always pick Semillon before Chardonnay. Now we pick Chardonnay before Semillon. So that's what the data tells us.
Great. Cool. Well, gents, thank you so much for joining me this evening for you. It's great to see you all again. I love tasting these wines. I hope everyone else loved exploring the Hunter with us this evening. I think we answered most of the questions there. We've got all of them out, which is great. So just want to say a big thank you. Thank you for joining us and taking the time out. Enjoy your evening, and also thank you everyone for joining. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Well, good day, really.